Just when I think I've seen it all and nothing could get worse, I'm reminded of this man right here who would literally abduct women, fly them to his private property in Alaska, strip them naked, and then release them into the wilderness where he would then hunt them down and kill them with his hunting knives and rifles. He killed as many as 21 women the exact same way, yet it took police over 10 years to look into all of the women and girls who suddenly went missing in Anchorage, Alaska. And if you think, well, if there really are people like him, why don't I ever see them? And my answer to that is you do. He was a normal, small little man who owned a popular bakery. Everyone seemed to like him, yet he still got away with literally hunting these women like animals. And I can guarantee, with all of the stuff we see being exposed today, there are more people just like him that have not been caught yet. This is the disturbing case of Robert Hansen, otherwise known as the Butcher Baker of Alaska. And I'm just giving you a fair warning right now that this is the stuff that nightmares are made of. So with that being said, let's talk about it. This is Robert Hansen. Robert grew up in Iowa with his mom and dad, and his dad actually owned a very successful bakery that Robert spent a lot of his youth working at. But Robert didn't have a great childhood. He was painfully shy because he had severe acne and a pretty bad stutter, and because of this, he would routinely get bullied in school. To mentally escape, Robert would spend a lot of his time hunting and doing archery in the woods, and this hobby stayed with him into adulthood. He was very well versed with guns and killing animals, and once an adult, he served 1 year in the United States Army Reserve. After he was discharged, he went on to work as an assistant drill instructor at a police academy in Pocahontas, Iowa. I'm only telling you this because it paints a picture of how everyone saw Robert and the kind of connections that he had. In 1960, he married a woman that he met at the police academy, but it didn't last long, because in December of that year, he was arrested for burning down an Iowa school bus garage. He did it to get revenge on all of those people who bullied him growing up. He was sentenced to 3 years for this, but he only served 20 months, during which he was diagnosed with manic depression with periodic schizophrenic episodes. The psychiatrist said that he had an infantile personality and was obsessed with revenge, but still, they released him early. Robert's wife divorced him after this, which she definitely dodged a bullet, but over the next few years, he would be arrested multiple times for petty theft. In 1967, Robert got remarried and had 2 kids, and he wanted a fresh start, so he and his family ended up moving to Anchorage, Alaska. At least to everyone around him, Robert seemed to have turned his life around. He opened up his own bakery, was super well liked by the community, and even set a bunch of hunting records. Yeah, he was quiet and small and a little weird, but overall he flew under the radar. But of course, this didn't last very long though, because in December of 1971, he would be arrested 2 more times, and unfortunately, this wasn't for things like petty theft. His crimes were escalating and fast. He was first arrested for abducting a woman and attempting to SA her, and the second time he was arrested for actually SAing an unidentified sex worker. Robert pleaded no contest to assault with a deadly weapon for the first crime, which essentially means that he accepted conviction and punishment without formally admitting his guilt. And then the SA charge involving the sex worker was dropped as part of a plea deal, which is infuriating. This time, Robert was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but somehow he was released after only serving 6 months. He was released as part of a work release program, but still, he very obviously was dangerous, yet no one seemed to care. Likely because he was going after sex workers, and no one wanted to believe them. It's believed that over the next 10 years, starting in 1971, Robert would begin to kill women. He started out with young girls between the ages of 16 to 19 who were down on their luck, and then he would target sex workers or women who he thought nobody would miss. He would stalk these women and learn their habits, and then he would offer to give them rides. Once inside the car, he would hold them at gunpoint, drive them back to his home, SA, and torture them. Robert would then strip them naked and release them into the wilderness, where he would then hunt them down and kill them by either stabbing them with his hunting knives or shooting them with his rifles. What's really sad is that over this 10-year period, so many women and young girls disappeared all around Anchorage, but police never really bothered looking into it. That is, until June 13th, 1983. That day, Robert offered 17-year-old Cindy Paulson $200 to perform sex acts on him. When she got in his car, he then held her at gunpoint and then drove her back to his home in Muldoon. He then held her captive, SAing her repeatedly and torturing her. Robert chained her by her neck to a post in the basement and then took a nap on a nearby couch. When he woke up, he took her to Merrill Field, where his private plane was waiting. Robert told Cindy that he was going to take her to a shack near the Nick River area of the Matanuska-Susitna Valley, which is only accessible by boat or plane, and that nobody would find her. He began packing up the cockpit of his plane as Cindy was crouched in the back seat of his car. Her wrists were handcuffed in front of her body. At one point, though, Robert had his back turned to her, and she saw this as the perfect opportunity to try and escape. So, still handcuffed, she quietly crawled out of his car and started sprinting to a nearby road, with Robert chasing closely behind. Just as he was about to catch up to her, Cindy was able to flag down a passing truck who stopped to help her and drove off, leaving Robert behind. The truck driver took her to a nearby motel where she ran inside and begged the clerk to let her use the phone to call her boyfriend, who was staying at another motel nearby called the Big Timber Motel. But the truck driver was obviously very concerned, so he called the police to let them know what happened. When Anchorage PD arrived, they found Cindy in the Big Timber Motel in one of the rooms. She was then taken to the police station where she told them everything. The description of her attacker and how she purposefully left her blue shoes on the passenger side floor in the back seat of his car as evidence that she was there. She was so incredibly brave and smart. From her description, though, police brought in Robert for questioning. He, of course, denied all of it and said that Cindy was just trying to get him in trouble because she was trying to extort him and he wouldn't pay her. This was an excuse he used a lot, and because of how small Robert was and his quiet and gentle demeanor, police viewed him as this humble, small-town baker who could do no harm. It also didn't help that his friend lied for him and said that he was with Robert all day when he wasn't. But because of all that, Anchorage PD released Robert and didn't even consider him a suspect in Cindy's abduction. But after they released him, more and more bodies would turn up around Anchorage, Seward, and the Matanuska-Susitna Valley area, and several women would begin to disappear into thin air. The first body that was found is only known as Eglutna Annie. Her real name and identity has never been discovered, but her body was found buried next to a power line in a wooded area near Eglutna Road. She was found on July 21st, 1980. Not long after this, the body of Joanna Messina was found buried in a gravel pit near Seward. 2 years later, the remains of 23-year-old Sherry Morrow were found in a shallow grave near the Nick River. So in just 2 years, you now had 3 women all murdered in the same area. And because of that, Anchorage police knew. These women were all killed by the same man. This wasn't just a one-off situation, but rather there was a serial killer on the loose, one who was moving incredibly fast. So the FBI was brought in to assist with the investigation, specifically Special Agent John Douglas. And based on evidence at the crime scene, John put together the killer's suspected profile. He believed that the killer was an experienced hunter with low self-esteem. He had a history of being rejected by women and might even keep souvenirs of his murders, like the victim's jewelry. And somehow, he even guessed that the killer might even have a stutter, which is crazy, and I don't know how he came to that conclusion. So with this profile in mind, police interviewed everyone in the area who could possibly fit, and eventually they landed on Robert Hansen. And what's weird is that Robert fit this description to a T, even down to the stutter, and he even owned a plane, which made killing and disposing of these women easier. So police got a warrant to search not only his plane, but his car, house, and properties, and they found some pretty disturbing things. There, they found jewelry that belonged to some of the missing and murdered women, as well as a huge stash of guns and weapons hidden in his attic. But that's not all they found, because hidden behind Robert's headboard was what police called a murder map. It was an aeronautical chart with 37 written X marks. Police didn't know it at the time, but each of those X marks were actually burial sites that Robert disposed of these women. As police were pulling out each piece of evidence, they showed it to Robert, and at first he tried denying all of it. But eventually he started to confess, but he still blamed his victims and tried to justify his actions. Needless to say, Robert was quickly arrested, and at the time of his arrest, he was only charged with the murders of 4 women: Eglutna Annie, Sherry Morrow, and Joanna Messina, whose bodies were first found, and then 30-year-old Paula Golding. Robert abducted Paula on April 25th, 1983. He flew her with his private plane to a really remote area, and then he let her go. As she ran away naked, he shot her to death and then buried her in a shallow grave. So he was only charged with these 4 murders at first, and then the abduction and SA of Cindy Paulson. As part of an agreement, Robert explained his murder map and ended up confessing to 17 more murders, and he actually led authorities to the women's grave sites. At this point in time, at least 12 of those were unknown to authorities, and it was then that they realized that Robert likely had way more victims than anyone could have thought. All around South Central Alaska, police found 37 different sets of remains, and they aren't sure if they're all connected back to Robert or not, but it's possible that he killed upwards of 21 women. These are his other victims, 17 of which are confirmed. So obviously we have Eglutna Annie, and Robert admitted to stabbing her in the back when she tried to escape from his car. He said that she was a sex worker, and that was his first victim. But sadly, not much is known about her because by the time her body was found, she was mostly consumed by wildlife. Another one of his victims was 18-year-old 22-year-old Celia Van Zanten. Celia left her house on the evening of December 22nd, 1971 to walk to a supermarket, but she never made it. She was reported missing 2 days later, and on Christmas Day, her body was found in Chugach State Park. Her chest was sliced open with a knife. She was bound and SA'd and then dumped into a really deep ravine. What's so sad is that when Robert dumped her, she was still alive, and evidence shows that she tried to climb up the steep hill, but because she was tied up, she couldn't, and she ended up dying of exposure. Robert denied killing her, but it's assumed he did because there was an X marked right at her burial site. Another one of his victims was 17-year-old Megan Siobhan Emmerich. Megan disappeared on July 7th, 1973 from Seward. She was last seen leaving the laundry room at her boarding school, but her body has never been found. Robert denied killing her to police as well, but again, there was an X mark on his murder map exactly where she disappeared from. And it's been reported that Robert did confess to another inmate about killing her and burying her near a remote cabin only accessible by boat. It also has been confirmed that he was in Seward the day she disappeared, so it seems likely that he was responsible for her disappearance. These are the rest of his confirmed victims. 22-year-old Mary Kathleen Thill. She disappeared in 1975 after being seen near her Seward home. Robert later admitted that he killed her and dumped her body in Resurrection Bay. Like I mentioned earlier, 24-year-old Joanna Messina. She was shot near the Snow River in 1980 after he refused to pay her. Her body was left in a gravel pit and badly decomposed when found. 24-year-old Roxanne Easeland. She vanished in 1980 after meeting a man downtown. Robert confessed, but her body was never recovered. 41-year-old Lisa Futrell. Lisa was kidnapped from a nightclub in 1980. Her remains were found years later buried near a gravel pit. 28-year-old Malai Larson. Malai went missing in 1981, and her body was discovered near the Nick Arm Bridge in 1984. Again, like I mentioned earlier, 23-year-old Sherry Morrow. Robert lured her with a fake photo shoot in 1981, shot her multiple times, redressed her after death, and buried her in a shallow grave. 24-year-old Andrea Mona Altieri. She was abducted for a supposed performance job, SA'd, killed, and thrown off a bridge. Her body was never found. 23-year-old Sue Luna. Sue was hunted through the wilderness after being forced to run naked before he shot her. Robert buried her near the Nick River. 20-year-old Tamara Peterson. She disappeared after accepting a photo shoot offer in 1982. Her body was only found after Robert confessed. 24-year-old Angela Fettern. Angela vanished in 1983, and her remains were discovered near a remote lake the following year. 22-year-old Delynn Frey. Delynn was found on a sandbar in 1985 and was buried as a Jane Doe, but she was identified years later through jewelry. 22-year-old Teresa Watson. Teresa was abducted in 1983 and left where she was killed because the ground was frozen. Her body was discovered in 1984. 19-year-old Robin Pelkey. Robin was found as partial remains in 1984, but later identified through forensic genealogy decades later. She had been stabbed and shot. With all of his confessions and the fact that the bullets found at each crime scene matched back to his own guns, Robert was found guilty. Despite all of his confessions though, and the fact that all of those victims were definitely caused by him, he was only ever formally charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. I guess authorities could only find concrete evidence on those 4 women, but it's suspected that he could have killed up to 37 women and girls. He was then sentenced to 461 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Robert died in 2014 from natural causes, and he was 75 years old. I just personally don't think it's very fair that he got to live out the rest of his natural life while all of those women and little girls had their lives ripped from them at the hands of this monster. And it's horrible that they kept disappearing left and right, yet authorities took over 10 years to begin investigating. Especially with Robert's criminal history, they weren't super close with their families or really anyone that could have quickly realized that they were missing. Robert basically thought like a hunter because he was one. Who could he take that would go unnoticed or unbelieved? And sadly, that's how he got away with doing this to so many women for so long. There have been a few movies inspired by this case, like The Frozen Ground, which is incredibly disturbing. They've also used this case as inspiration in shows like Criminal Minds, Cold Case, and Law & Order, in case you've seen it before. I just can't even imagine how scared these women must have been running for their lives like that in the cold wilderness, thinking they had a chance to escape, only for him to hunt them down and kill them. But it's now been 55 years since Robert first started hunting humans on his property, and the wreckage he left continues to haunt those who live there to this day.